What's up, guys? I'm Tasik, and behind me is my 2JZ E36 drift car, and it's got a 2JZ GE out of a IS300 and like SC300. Basically, it's a non-VVTi bottom end with a VVTi head, because the non-VVTi bottom end is a lot stronger, but we want the VVTi for low-end torque for drifting. As you can see, we've got a single turbo on it. It's a humongous BorgWarner S366. And in the last video, I just finished wiring it up. We got the engine cranking, and today it's time to get this thing started. I'm super pumped. I've been building this car for over a year now, and I am ready to frickin' drive it. So there's just a few more things that I need to do before I can try to start it. The main thing is going to be fuel. I'm going to use the stock fuel lines for now because my goal is only about 450 horsepower because I'm running the stock 2JZ GTE JDM Aristo ECU. So I'm going to be using the stock fuel lines with adapters to go to 6 AN, and then from there we'll go to a fuel pressure regulator, and from there into the fuel rail, which I have drilled and welded a return on so that we can have a return system. So basically I just need to get the fuel pressure regulator installed and get lines hooked up. One of the other things is I have a Mishimoto oil cooler sandwich plate for the oil filter. And right now the two ports are just wide open, so if I were to start the engine it would just spew oil everywhere. So I need to get lines connected to that and get it connected to the oil cooler. Let's see, what else is there? Spark plugs, I haven't installed those yet, so I need to gap them and install those. And I need to install the intake manifold. As you can see, that's not on, so I just need to get that bolted on, get all the injectors plugged in, and I think that's it. There might be a couple other small things, but we'll get to that when that time comes. For now, intake, I'm going to get that bolted on real quick, and then we'll start mounting the fuel pressure regulator and working on fuel and oil lines. So let's get to it. Okay, so I got the intake manifold on, got all my injectors hooked up. So now it's time to do some spark plugs. I'm going to be using the NGK BKR7Es 4644. It's just a standard copper plug, about $4 a piece. Tons of 2JZ guys run these plugs and they say they work really well, so I'm going to go with what's proven. Now these plugs are gapped to about 38 thousandths or 0.038 from the factory. And for the boosted application with our stock ignition system, we need to drop that down to about 28 thousandths or 0.028. That way we don't blow out the spark with the boost. So I already gapped them all to 0.028, so they're ready to throw in. Okay, so now that the spark plugs are done, we're ready to move on to the fuel system. A couple things I need to do for that. Obviously, fuel lines to the rail is number one, but before I can do that, I need to install the fuel pressure regulator and then also the fuel pump, which I'm going to be using a Walbro 450. And this is what I have for a fuel pressure regulator. It's a kit from Amazon by Evil Energy. Comes with a gauge and everything. I've been getting a lot of my AN lines and stuff like that from this Evil Energy brand because it's all prime shipping and pretty reasonably priced. I guess we'll kind of have to just wait and see if it's good quality or not, but hopefully nothing leaks when I start it up. So I've already got some riv nuts installed right here for the pressure regulator, so I can get that thrown on. All right, fuel pressure regulator is installed and I got the gauge mounted on it. So now I'm going to work on the fuel pump. So I've got a Walbro 450 liter per hour fuel pump, but it is a smaller diameter than the original BMW pump. The original pump had this like ridge here, and then it kind of just snapped into this plastic housing. So what I want to do instead of that is
take and use this hose clamp to tighten down these slotted tabs, and that should squeeze the fuel pump. But the problem is the fuel pump is too small in diameter for it to do that. So I bought a rubber sleeve that's meant for these Walbro pumps that will make it bigger in diameter. I don't have it yet, so I'm going to do something kind of ghetto and use a little bit of a silicone coupler. This is not going to be down in the fuel because I don't have a full tank. This is only going to be for getting the engine running, and my other part should be here soon, because I don't know if this silicone coupler is fuel safe or not. But we're going to use it temporarily. It should work, and we'll be able to install the fuel pump and get fuel. First things first, one of the most important parts is making sure that we have the pump at the right depth in relation to the mount. I'm going to reinstall the old pump, maybe. And with the old pump installed, I want to measure from the bottom of this mount to where the sock attaches. So I get about 1.5 inches to there. Okay, so I got the fuel pump attached. I was able to actually knock out these factory pins with a punch and a hammer and then run the new wires through there. I had to drill out the holes just a little bit. It's always better to use a larger gauge wire with upgraded fuel pumps, so you don't have any voltage drop. And we're also going to be adding a relay and wire directly from the battery to reduce voltage drop even further. So we'll get this back in the car and then we can get it connected.
Okay, so I finished reinstalling the fuel pump, and I also got a new fuel pump relay installed. As you can see here, it's right next to the battery with an inline fuse. Not, crazy about the look of this. It's a little janky. I will put loom around everything, but it's, like I said before, it's important to have a relay right near the battery so that there's no voltage drop, and the relay then goes to the pump, which is right over there. So fairly short wire distance, and the gauge of the wire is also increased, so we shouldn't have any voltage drop. And if you don't know what voltage drop is, basically the longer your wire is, the more voltage you lose. So say you started with 12 volts at the battery, well, if you had a 100-foot wire, you might only have 11 volts by the time you got that 100 feet to the device. And so then your device isn't going to operate as well as it should. And that's a big deal when it comes to fuel pumps, especially large fuel pumps that require a lot more juice and put out a lot more flow. So that's one of the things, like if you were to get your car tuned, the tuner would look at that first. If you were having fuel pressure issues, the first thing they're going to look at and ask you is, do you have a relay with larger gauge wires? Because if you don't, if you're just using the factory wires, odds are your pump is not going to perform as well as it should. We also got the oil cooler mounted right here from Mishimoto, and lines running to the sandwich plate, so now we won't spew oil out of the sandwich plate. And next would be working on the fuel lines, but unfortunately I'm like 3 fittings short of being able to put together all the fuel lines. So while I'm waiting on those to come, I want to work on the gauges. I've got 4 gauges to install in the car, the most important one for now being oil pressure. It's nice to have an oil pressure gauge the first time you start up an engine so that you know whether there's oil pressure or not. If you don't have oil pressure, you probably don't want to start your engine. So the oil pressure gauge that I got uses a electronic sender to send a signal into the car to the gauge rather than running an oil line from the engine inside the car. It's a 1/8 inch MPT sensor, which will go straight into the sandwich plate. It'll just screw right in, and then we need to run a wire from there to the gauge. And then I also have a coolant temp sensor so that I have a more accurate reading than just the standard factory gauge, which can be off 20 to 30 degrees. And then I have a wideband and a boost gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and run all the wires and everything for those now, and then also run wires for the electric fan, and then I should be done running wires in theory. So here's the gauges I got. This is the kind of thing that can really surprise you when it comes to build cost, and it's kind of a unexpected cost that you weren't thinking about, because the boost and the AFR gauges are over $100 each. They are not cheap, but you don't really want to cheap out on especially the AFR. Very important that you have an accurate AFR reading. And this gauge does come with the sensor, the wideband sensor, so you get the sensor and the gauge, and then the boost gauge obviously, and then we have the cheap glow shift Amazon specials for oil pressure and coolant. Oil pressure and coolant are very simple, so it's kind of hard to mess up a gauge for those. You know, the quality of the gauge itself might not be the best, the plastic and everything, but they should work fine. So time to pull out the sensors that I'll need and get those in the car and then start running wires. Okay, so I got the gauges all installed and switches on this aluminum gauge panel, and I ran the wires for all the gauges. It's nice that they all come with their own harnesses, so you don't have to sort and find your own wires for it, other than the water temp gauge, but that only needs one wire anyways. So now all that's left before we can try to start it is fuel lines. So I'm gonna crawl underneath. I have these compression fittings that go on the factory hard lines and convert it to 6AN. So we'll convert both factory hard lines to 6AN, and then we can run AN lines, which will be super easy. So the factory BMW hard lines are 5/16 in diameter. Not great for big power, but it should handle the 400 to 450 that we're going to be running for now. So the way these work is you have this end, which goes over the line like this. Sometimes with this coating on the line, it can make this a little snug, so you may have to sand off the coating first. But then once you have that part of the line on, you take this brass ferrule. That goes on like so over the line. And then you take your other end, it goes over the line and then starts to thread in. As you tighten this, it'll crush that brass piece in there and squeeze it against the line to create a tight seal. Now if you're like me and you F up one of those little brass pieces, Piper! If you're like me and you mess up one of those little brass pieces, you can get them at hardware stores for like 17 cents a piece. They have them in all different sizes. In this case, we needed a 5/16, so got another one and it goes right on there. And those are a one-time use, so if you ever do have to take this fitting off, throw away that brass ferrule and buy another one. The other thing is, it's important when cutting the lines that you use an actual tubing cutter. Like the small one was nice and handy, so that it can just go right around the tube and not run into a bunch of stuff. Or you can use one of these bigger ones if you have the room for it. But these will leave you with a nice clean cut, just like if you're doing brake line fittings and you need to flare them, you want a nice clean cut. Also, you don't want to have power tools and sparks around fuel lines, so whatever you're using to cut it, make sure it's not creating sparks and leaves you with a clean cut. Otherwise, these will not fit on there. Okay, so we got all the fuel lines hooked up to the rail, to the regulator. We have a temporary filter underneath because I messed up one of the fittings going to the hard lines. And we have our oil pressure gauge hooked up temporarily just to see if we're getting any oil pressure. And the pump is hooked up, if you can hear it. So yeah, I think we're ready to try to start this thing. Cross our fingers and hope that it works and doesn't blow up. Fire extinguisher, we need one of those. Just in case. Okay, let's see what happens.
Whoa!
We got something happening.
What was that?
That could have been like an intake backfire. Well, she's got spark. We know
Sparks.
that.
Yeah.
At least some.
Jesus.
And I assume that means the injectors are working too.
Whoa! Smoke.
It usually doesn't backfire like that unless your timing's off. That's usually a good indication, but I don't think my timing's off. I double, triple check that shit.
That is interesting.
Very. Those are definitely fireballs inside the turbo. Huh. I could see them through the frickin' hole.
Oh, that's awesome.
The other possible thing is if I had one of my coil packs wired backwards. Okay, so Michael and I did just a little bit of troubleshooting last night. The first thing we did was check timing with the timing light. Now that was a struggle. I tried putting it on the spark plug wires like you would do for any normal older style distributor car like a small block Chevy, and I wasn't getting a signal to the timing light gun. Finally, I realized that I needed to just put the timing light gun on the wire from the igniter, the coil number 1 wire, which is the black wire from the factory. If you put it on there, you get a signal and works great. So I checked the timing that way and it looked good. I was still a little paranoid, thinking that maybe I had the timing off by 180 degrees because the crank actually rotates 2 times for 1 revolution of the camshaft. But I took the number 1 spark plug out and I made sure that when all 3 of my marks were lined up, so on the crank and the cams, my piston 1 was at top dead center, which it's supposed to be. So timing's good. So after that I started looking at wiring and I think I found the problem, but so it's a little bit confusing because the engine mechanical service manual has the coil packs labeled as 1, 3, 2. For whatever reason, number 1 is at the back, 3 is in the middle, and 2 is at the front. Now that kind of makes sense because the coil pack all the way at the back on cylinder number 6 actually controls cylinder number 1 as well, so it would make sense for that to be number 1. But if you then go and look at the wiring diagram for the igniter, which has coil 1, coil 2, coil 3 labeled on it, it tells you that coil 1 on the igniter, or C1, should go to coil 1. Well, if you follow the mechanical diagram, coil 1 would be the one in the back. But I think in the wiring diagram, it's actually referring to them in order from front to back. That's my guess anyways. So I've switched them around. All I did was repin the igniter connector. So now, fingers crossed, they should start. Long story short, it's super confusing. Definitely some conflicting information there in the service manuals, but assuming this works, I will show you guys the right way so you know exactly which wire on the igniter needs to go to which coil pack, and you shouldn't have this problem. Okay, attempt number 2. Let's see what happens. Make sure nothing's gonna get grabbed by the belt. Fuel pump is unplugged. Let me plug that in real quick. All right, here we go. Oh man, we're close. Battery's a little dead though. Okay then. Oh. I forgot my idle air control valve hole is wide open. Guessing that's why it revved to the moon like that. So let me block that off and then we'll see what happens. But holy crap, it starts. Okay, so I just blocked that off with some masking tape real quick. Let's see what she does now. Okay, rev to the moon again. Don't know why. Have to figure that out for sure. That's a little scary. But it's running. So, okay, so it looks like the tape fell off my idle air control valve opening. So I'm pretty sure that's what caused it to rev up again. So I've gone ahead and made a block off plate out of aluminum. And the reason I need this instead of actually just putting the IAC valve in there is because I figured out that the VVTi engine used the electronic throttle body for idle control instead of an idle air control valve. So it doesn't have the wires to output to the valve. I thought I could just take a valve off like an SC300 or LS400 and put it on here with the weld-on bung. But I don't have wires on the ECU to control it. So if any of you guys know how to make that work, let me know. But otherwise, I'm not really too concerned about it. This is a race car. I'll sit here and rev it up until it's warm and will idle by itself. It's not really that big a deal. Now, we are going to put some RTV on this so that it seals, and should be pretty simple. All right, let's start her up again and see how she idles now. I'd call that a success. Got a ton of smoke coming out, most likely just some leftover assembly lube and other things in the pistons. Definitely going to keep an eye on it and make sure that it doesn't last long and that it goes away. But it idles, it revs, hell yeah. Alright, so we're going to end this one here. If you guys are as excited as I am, make sure you smash that like button. Also, subscribe for more. I'm so grateful for all your guys' support, and there's definitely going to be more cool content coming. Got to finish up the cooling system on this thing now, do electric fans, power steering, do the brake system with the ABS delete and the brake booster delete, and after that it's just drive shaft, hook up the shifter, and I think we can drive it. So it's been about a year and a half since I started this project. To hear this engine run is just so motivating. And I'm so excited to finally be able to drive it and hopefully make it to a drift event this year. I'm actually going to shoot for one in about 40 days. So just a little over a month is one of the first big events of the season. Hopefully I can get this thing out there and get some test laps in and see how she does. But until next time, hope you guys have a good day or a night, and we'll see you later.